This video is sponsored by Ground News. Why hello my fellow apes, I hope you are well. Lately, I've been in a bit of a feud with Christian apologist David Wood. I even published a near 6-hour response to his case for the resurrection of Jesus. You haven't presented any evidence. This is the problem with being so overconfident. Now, I understand that not everyone has the time or inclination to sit through such a marathon, so I thought I'd create a condensed version to explain, in a nutshell, why David's case is wanting. And I'm glad that I have, as David has said that he won't watch our refutation because it's too long.
Hey, look at this. RR. Rationality Rules and Myth Vision collabed against D. Wood on Jesus Resurrection. Yeah.
I saw a thumbnail.
Yeah, I saw the thumbnail too. It's 5.5 hours.
What?
5.5 hours. It reminds me of the Dawa guys, where every time you respond to them, they try to do something like longer and longer to just eventually wear you down. You're like, I'm not responding to this. I'm not watching 5.5 hours.
Okay, so first of all, please, David, let's not compare each other to Dawa. We all know that's a benchmark neither of us are anywhere near. Dawa is his own tier. Second, considering that you and your fans were upset that I didn't respond to all of your arguments, it may be worth understanding Brandolini's law, also known as the bullshit asymmetry principle. It takes longer to clean something up than it does to make a mess. But since you won't watch videos the length that you frequently make, here's a shorter version for you. The crux, if you will. Surely, this abridged rendition is suffice. Thirdly, please stop misrepresenting me and Derek as mythicists. We're not.
I mean, we're just talking about like Rationality Rules and Derek from the Jesus Mythers.
This is something we made clear in our response that you won't watch. In fact, one of our central criticisms is that you make out that most atheists are mythicists, and so the irony of you doing it to us is... Come on, my dude. Don't be Dawa. Talking of Dawa, one thing that he and Wood have in common is that they're not fans of all things LGBT. So they're going to be triggered by this one. Thailand becomes first Southeast Asian country to legalise same-sex marriage. Well done, my dudes. Congratulations. Unfortunately, basic rights are a controversial topic clouded by bias, and in this case, religious bias. So getting the facts can be hard. But not with Ground News, a website and app that effortlessly compares news across the political spectrum. They deliver the facts in a clear, unfiltered manner, all in one place. Thailand's Senate has voted to legalise same-sex marriage, making it the third Asian, but first Southeast Asian, country to recognise the right. On Ground News, I can easily access more than 150 articles and see pretty clearly that it's being covered mainly by left and centre-leaning sources. Indeed, less than 15% are coming from right-wing media, making this news a potential blind spot for those readers. This gives us a lot of information at a glance, but we can scroll down to see each outlet and easily compare the different headlines being reported on the story. This is accompanied by their factual reliability and ownership, which is important context considering the source of our information can heavily influence how they spin a story. Ground News ensures that I receive the critical takeaways of breaking news quickly and efficiently, shattering my echo chamber so that I can get the true picture. This is crucial in today's environment, especially as elections approach. I find myself following news of the UK election and the European Union, and indeed the United States, to make sure that I'm getting the most balanced information. If you want to be an informed citizen, I highly recommend checking out ground.news/rationality and see it for yourself, or simply scan the code on screen. Don't let media bias fool you. Get the full picture with Ground News. Alright, let's get to the succinct refutation, beginning with Alexander the Great. Yeah, I know, quite a pivot from Jesus, but indulge me, have faith. Alexander the Great was a legendary king from Macedonia who lived around 356 BCE. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest military commanders in history, known for his unparalleled success in battles and his vast empire that stretched from Greece to India. But how do we know Alexander actually existed? How do we know that he isn't merely a mythological figure? Fortunately, there is overwhelming evidence. The ancient historians Arrian, Plutarch, Diodorus, Quintus Rufus, and Marcus Junianus Justinus wrote about Alexander within a few centuries of his life, drawing from earlier sources. These earlier sources include the works of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's generals, and Aristobulus of Cassandria, who accompanied Alexander on his campaigns. Although their original works are now fragmented or even lost entirely, later historians heavily reference them, providing a foundation for our knowledge of this great man. Additionally, Alexander is mentioned in ancient inscriptions and coins, and archaeologists have uncovered ruins of cities he founded. Now, this methodology of examining multiple early independent historical sources to establish the basic facts of an individual's existence is the same approach used by scholars to conclude figures such as Julius Caesar, Plato, and indeed Jesus of Nazareth were real people, not myths. So far, so good. But watch what I do next. Since we've established Alexander's existence, we must also accept the ancient accounts of his divine birth and lineage. After all, his official biographers proclaim that he was the son of Zeus and that his mother, Olympias, conceived him after being impregnated by a divine serpent, as Plutarch insists in his Life of Alexander. Surely, we cannot accept Alexander's existence but reject his divinity. Except absolutely we can. Obviously we can. No credible historian today believes Alexander was literally the son of Zeus, despite using the sources that claim his divine conception to establish his existence. The evidence for Alexander's existence is not evidence for his divinity. The same applies to many other fantastical tales surrounding Alexander. For example, there's a popular legend that he cut the Gordian knot with his sword, fulfilling a prophecy that whoever untied the knot would rule all of Asia. Additionally, the Oracle of Siwa declared him to be a god, bolstering his divine status among his followers. There's also a tale that he was guided across the desert by ravens, showing divine intervention into his endeavours. And to give just one more feat, his birth was supposedly marked by signs and wonders, such as the Temple of Artemis burning down on the day he was born, signalling the arrival of a great man. Again, the fact that Alexander existed does not mean we must naively accept all these legendary and superficial claims about him, even if the same authors who establish his existence affirm his miraculous feats. However, this obviously flawed reasoning is precisely what David employs in his case for the resurrection of Jesus. He begins by reading out 6 quotes, each expressing the certainty of Jesus' crucifixion, reflecting expert consensus.
So, Jesus' death isn't simply a point of Christian doctrine, it's a fact of history.
One of the scholars he quotes was John Dominic Crossan, who, by the way, was so kind to join Derek and me in our refutation. Comparing David's quotes about Jesus' crucifixion to our case of Alexander, it's the equivalent to displaying that scholars agree that Alexander conquered Persia. Or, if you want an execution example, it's akin to quoting scholars affirming Caesar's assassination in the Senate. It's a fairly mundane fact accepted by the vast majority of historians. So why does David spend so much time substantiating this? Well, to be fair, there are people who doubt the crucifixion, and of course others who doubt Jesus' existence altogether. Now, mythicism isn't the norm among atheists, and it's certainly not among contemporary scholars, so we can interpret David as simply contending with potential mythicist-aligned objections. In any case, though, by quoting these scholars and reading each of their words in full, David creates an illusion of academic support for his conclusion, even though the experts he cites don't actually endorse his specific claims about Jesus' divinity and resurrection. Moving on, David reads out 6 more quotes, establishing that the Christian tradition began months to years after Jesus' death.
And scholars date its formulation to within a few years of Jesus' crucifixion.
Once again, this doesn't achieve much. You might even be thinking, what does it achieve at all? I mean, accounts of Muhammad's supposed miracle deeds started in his lifetime. The same is true of Julius Caesar and, of course, Alexander.
I would just like to say, has he ever heard of Joseph Smith? I'm not sure if he has.
So, what's with this emphasis? What does it achieve? Well, first of all, it again bolsters the academic veneer of David's argument. It seems like he's justifying his conclusion with academic rigor, but actually, the premises don't get us there. Second, it's actually a telltale. It's because Christianity has a weak spot when it comes to historicity. The earliest accounts of Jesus that we have are from Paul, who wrote 20 to 30 years after Jesus died, and the other Gospels were written much later. And, as the scholars that David quotes will tell you, it's very obvious that they plagiarise and in many cases contradict one another. Worse still, it's obvious that they borrow tropes from the time.
Mark, the first gospel, gives us a tomb story. Is this a well-known trope to have empty tombs, or is it literally historical?
As a trope, let me give it a trope. One of the earliest, and probably the first novel, I think is the right word, by Cariton of Aphrodisias, Callirrhoe, when he has murdered his wife, actually, but when she's in the tomb, he comes repentant to the tomb. He finds the tomb open, and people go in and say, she's gone.
So, Christianity struggles with its timeline. Now, while this gap might seem significant, and it is somewhat unusual compared to figures like Alexander and Caesar who had contemporaneous accounts, it is still within the reasonable time frame for historical analysis, especially considering the oral traditions of the time. So David is trying to cover one of Christianity's weakest spots. Still, nothing he's put on the table so far is spectacular. It's actually a lot weaker than the evidence we have for Alexander the Great. But, for me at least, it's enough. Finally, David reads out 4 more quotes conveying that early followers of Jesus came to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. For instance, he quotes Paula Fredrickson, who says,
I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know, as a historian, that they must have seen something.
And that, believe it or not, is the totality of David's scholarly case. Indeed, that's it. Early on, his followers believed it.
Has he ever heard of Joseph Smith?
David uses the consensus of early Christian belief as if it somehow establishes the entirety of Paul's work, as if it gets us to Jesus dying for our sins.
We have Jesus' death for sins,
His burial, resurrecting on the 3rd day,
his resurrection on the 3rd day,
and appearing to many.
and numerous appearances.
But it's clear, is it not, that this is as empty as referencing scholars who agree on Alexander the Great's historical facts, such as his life, conquest, and city establishments, and then abruptly asserting his divine heritage alongside miraculous narratives and fantastical tales. Unfortunately, David doesn't seem to recognise the flawed logic he's using, and no, there's no nice way of saying that. It's just poor reasoning. But somehow, he's convinced that there's only one conclusion to be drawn.
So, there's only one conclusion to draw from the facts that even atheist and agnostic scholars grant as historically certain.
Now, what's truly baffling, and this is something that Derek and I unpack at length in our response, is that David is actually quick to point out such faulty logic when critiquing other religions like Islam, especially when debating figures like Ali Dawah and Muhammad Hijab. He'd never accept such a glaring fallacious argument for other religions. He'd never fall for such an obviously erroneous inference, if it can even be called that. So why doesn't he recognise it when it comes to his own religion? And how can he be so confident in his view while strawmanning atheism and the very scholars that he uses to bolster his argument?
Why do they reject the resurrection when they're aware of the historical evidence?
Well, that is for another time. That's right, I'm going to psychologize David Wood as he psychologizes the scholars he quotes to explain why they don't agree with him. It is absolutely absurd. You're talking Frank Turek level apologetics. It truly is pathetic.
And if we don't want to take his teachings seriously, or if we don't want to become Christians, or if we despise anything that has any connection to Christianity, we kind of need to get rid of that whole rising from the dead thing.
But for this video, my aim has been to lay bare the foundations of his argument, revealing its glaring inadequacies. It's clear to any discerning listener, Christian or non-Christian, that his case does not, at all, merit the overwhelming confidence with which he presents it. Anyhow, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to everyone who supports the channel, including Ground News. Do be sure to check out Ground News via the link below. Thanks.